Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt here with life coach Cindie Chavez. Today is Wednesday, April the 29th, 2020, 4 p.m. New York time, and wherever you are in the world, thanks for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that Cindie is back, although I had a good time catching up with my friend Joel last week, so it was like old times, but whenever we do a week of shows, Cindie, and you're not in it, I notice the difference.
Aw.
And I say that because, well, I mean, all of my co-hosts have wonderful perspectives and ideas and contributions that they make. You have a particularly strong, well, of course, relationships are your thing. That's what you do most of your coaching on and so forth. But you have this approach to the whole LOA concept based on relationships that colors everything that you say. And it's given me, I mean, I'll give you one quick example that we both have talked about on many occasions, how the relationship approach basically led you to kind of put aside the idea of good and bad when it comes to attracting stuff, or right and wrong, and replace it with prefer and don't prefer, like and don't like. And I've been adopting the same kind of thing. It completely shifted my whole way of thinking about things. And that's just one little example. So that's my long-winded way of saying I'm glad to have you back.
Oh, well, thank you. It's good to be back. I was thinking about time, and the perspective of time, and how when you said the date today, we're like, it's April 29th, 2020. And I was thinking that up until now, so often we would always kind of exclaim, oh my gosh, like it's almost May. And, but it feels like the last month has had 500 days in it. So it's like, I think we're all getting, letting go of that, like time is flying kind of feeling lately. I don't know.
It's an interesting point, because you and I have talked about that in the past, and we've talked about, maybe we slow the whole thing down a bit. Did we overdo it?
Yeah.
It sometimes feels like, wow, I often talk about how we don't notice our own manifestations, and yet I'm noticing more and more what I manifest, and this is an example of it. Until you pointed that out, I hadn't really thought about it, but oh my God, we actually did manifest that.
Well, I remember you saying that, wow, do we really have to go this far to avoid tax day on April 15th?
That's right.
So it has that sense of like, okay, maybe we overdid this. Yeah, but it does seem like I saw a t-shirt that said 2020 is an interesting leap year. There are 29 days in February, 300 days in March, and 5 years in April.
That's cute.
Yeah. So, but it's good to be back. I took off last week because it was my birthday, and had a great birthday, and now I'm happy to be back again.
That's great. And
thank you, Joel Elston, for taking my spot.
And he was loving it. I was loving it. Our audience was loving it. So that was great. So yeah, everything was good. It was good. You mentioned the meme that went around that 5 years in April or something like that. Right. And it kind of brings back to what we talked about before we started the show today. We're talking about how people have been experiencing stuff during quarantine that they don't normally experience. I mean, you brought up the example of people dealing with homeschooling,
right?
And that's just one of many things that people have been dealing with. That's just their lives are shifted. Yes. One of the things that came out in the last week or two was that the divorce rate in China after the lockdown skyrocketed because people found they couldn't live with each other anymore.
So interesting. I've actually coached some people in the past couple of weeks that are recognizing that they don't want to be married anymore.
Yeah.
And one of the people that I spoke with, the way they put it was that they said, I think that this quarantine has exacerbated or caused it to be faster what they thought would be an inevitable divorce. So what I thought was interesting is that it's really not that much of a shock to a lot of people. It's just that if they have a relationship that's not working, they can manage it all right if they're not really seeing each other too much. But suddenly when they're, and we've been kind of, not that I would joke about, divorce, but we've joked about, all the togetherness.
That's right.
What is all the togetherness? How is it showing up for you? And what I realize is that it's we've talked about money in this way before. Like, in other words, people will say, people will discover sometimes through coaching that they had a fear of becoming wealthy because they thought that being wealthy would turn them into like a jerk.
Mm.
And they'd be like, well, why? Well, probably because they grew up hearing people say that wealthy people are jerks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they don't want to be that. And so they keep a distance away from too much money because they don't want to be seen as a certain thing that they find distasteful. But what we've said on our show is that money is just a magnifier of whatever you already are. If you're already stingy, you're still going to be stingy when you get a lot of money. If you're a creative person, you're going to just have more money to spend on whatever tools you need to create things.
Mm-hmm.
If you're generous, you're going to have more money to give away. So it's just going to magnify. And I think that this quarantine or being together with groups of people or another person or being alone, it's just magnified whatever was already there. It doesn't really create something out of nothing. Either your relationship was solid or not. And so I have been coaching people around relationships, especially in the last couple of weeks. I think, how long has it been? I've been quarantining for 40 days.
How long has it been? I hadn't added it up. It's somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't think it's quite 40 for me, but it's close.
Well, my husband was looking at some, a calendar and some notes he had, and he said, "Oh, it's been over 40 days for you." And I said, "What?" He said, "You've been inside for over 40 days." And it hit me that that's actually the root of the word quarantine is 40.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. And that's what it used to be. I don't know where they came up with that number, but if you were quarantined, it was a 40-day thing. And so I realized, okay, I've been in for quite a long time. And so I think the first couple of weeks, it was kind of like novel for people, newish, like, oh, how are we going to deal with this? And then the next couple of weeks started feeling stressful because of certain things, expectations. And now it's really getting to where people are making decisions about it. So it's been interesting. And like you said, the homeschooling thing is a really big thing with all of a sudden, I know I have a friend that has a friend that has children of a similar age, but one of them has children that are in private school where the school is doing all this stuff via computer. So the school is providing all of the computer curriculum from a certain time, like regular school, like from 8 in the morning until whenever, like 7 hours of stuff, teachers. And then the other person is totally on their own, like the school's not providing anything. And they were comparing what they're able to do with what this other person's kids are getting through their private school. And I was like, no, please don't worry yourself like that, because, kids are natural learners.
True.
They're going to learn.
It's actually one of the most exciting things about kids, that they are natural learners. And when you kind of let go and just, it's not just letting go of curriculum, it's letting go of the fear that if they aren't led in some way, they aren't going to learn anything. If you just kind of let go of that fear, right, and then watch what happens. I mean, you don't have to wait long. I mean, we talk about manifestations that take forever. This is not one of them. This one shows up really, really quickly.
Think how fast and in depth kids learn about things they're interested in, whatever it is. Like what kids that will spend their free time, whether it's gaming or reading about dinosaurs, so many of them, even at a really young age, have this in-depth knowledge of a particular thing. And it's just because they're interested. Their whole life is going to be that way. Right. That's the way we are, right? We find out what we're curious about. We're all natural learners. I don't know when or if. I've never given it up. I still love to learn. I'm constantly finding new things to learn about. So, yeah.
And that's like 10 times more for the kids, because for everything that you and I might think of that we learn from those situations, they're learning, huge numbers more.
Yeah, so it's called neuroplasticity.
No kidding. Yeah. Yeah, it's huge, and it's ongoing. And I mean, I remember this from when I helped to found that Sudbury Model School, which
Right.
opened in September of 2002. It actually opened a year to the date after 9/11. And that first, what was it, 3 months that the school was open, I was directly involved day to day. It was fascinating to watch because this is a very non-traditional school method, right? This is a school where there are no formal classes that they have to attend. There's no transcripts, no grades. There's nothing, none of the usual stuff that you find in school. So very, very leading edge, out there kind of stuff. And it basically means they're on their own. They get to do whatever they want to do. And I was still around as like a staff member, to answer questions if they have a question or to help them out with stuff if they need help with stuff. But most of the time, it was just stand out of the way and watch. And it was fascinating to watch two dynamics happen in particular. One, all of these kids had previously been in public schools before. So the first dynamic was watching them try to figure out how to get me involved in making the decision of what they were going to do next.
Because they didn't have to do that before.
That's right. It was brand
Right?
new.
Someone else was telling them
All
at
the
every
time.
moment.
Yeah. So there was, and it hit all areas of school life. It hit more with the areas where kids would do something that would be damaging. Like, and we had an incident where one of the kids ended up damaging some of the equipment. We were renting space in a church, and it was in what they call their church school area, and some of the equipment got damaged. And so, well, that had to be dealt with. But the way the school was modeled, it wasn't up to the adults to fix that. It was up to the kids to figure that out.
Oh,
So they actually
wow.
they had to go figure that one out, and they resisted it. They were trying to find all the different ways. Could they get Walt to figure it out for them?
That's so funny. That's great though.
It was a great experience, and I have to admit I kind of pat myself on the back because I refused to solve any of the problem for them. I basically put in their corner and said, "Look, you got to deal with this." And they tried every which way they could. They even said, "Well, what if we just ignore it?" And I said, "Fine, go ahead, but we're going to lose our place." Oh, and they didn't want to go back to public school, so they found themselves in a place where they had to decide what to do. They had to
Yeah.
figure it out, and they ultimately did, But first, they had to go through all the machinations of how can we get somebody else to solve this for us because we're kids and we shouldn't have to solve this.
Well, and because they were probably faced with using a part of their brain that doesn't get used very often,
Absolutely, yeah,
right? And so it doesn't feel easy.
right.
And I think that, I mean, we all go through that. It's easier to just find someone else to do it or to just find a shortcut, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like when we will take the time to actually train our brain, I guess, because that's what all of this is about. That's what law of attraction is about. Or I
Mm-hmm.
should say, I really like to use the term conscious creation better, because the law of attraction is like talking about the law of gravity. And, it's just going to happen. We're all creating stuff. But when we do it consciously, sometimes we have to make the effort to really train our brain, to take control of our brain so that we can consciously choose what thoughts we're thinking and what actions we're taking based on those thoughts and what emotions we're feeling based on those thoughts. It's always based on a thought and some
Right.
story that we're telling, right? So
Yep.
I think that experience that the kids had at that school with adults saying, figure it out, like you can figure it out, that's such great training for the brain that if they keep doing that, they'll automatically be powerful creators because they're
Mm-hmm.
used to using their brain to find solutions, right? It's like so often when we talk about law of attraction, we talk about being focused on the problem or being focused on the lack,
Mm-hmm.
instead of being focused on what we want and focused on the solution. And that's what that's training them to do, is to find the solution.
It's a funny thing too when they're doing it because you can almost see the gears turning.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, you literally just watch the body language of the kids, and you can just see how they're trying out different combinations in their minds, and you can hear it too because if they're talking with each other, you're kind of following all that. Although because there's an adult in the room, they're trying to keep the conversation to a minimum because they don't want to give any clues away.
Of course. Well, I think it's saying that because you made the comment that you felt really proud of yourself for being able to like not help, to
Right.
be quiet, to not, go there.
Oh, because it's an overwhelming desire to just jump right in and solve it for them.
Right. And to do it for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I think, is that you made a comment about Joel in the past about an idea that he had about helping people.
Hmm.
It's the same kind of thing. It's like not to get so caught up in, that someone was experiencing something uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but that was part of their journey. And it may be the part of their journey that they're eternally grateful for because of where it leads them, like his story.
I can actually point to a specific that came out of that story that I referenced about the kids and when the kids got in trouble and so forth. I've actually told the fuller story on the podcast previously, many, many months ago. But the upshot of it was that the kid who got in trouble ended up becoming school president. And this is particularly noteworthy because before she joined our school, she was in foster care. She had basically been kicked out of all the schools that she'd been in previously. She was a social nonconformist. She had all kinds of issues, just huge numbers of issues. And just going through the experience that she went through at our school, she straightened herself out. She
Isn't
didn't
that great?
need a coach to come in or a therapist to come in to fix her. She was on all previously she'd been on all the drugs. She was on the ADD and every she was on every single one of those things you could possibly imagine. She was completely off of those by the
Wow.
time she got out of the school and a totally developed, fully formed human adult by the time she left the school. It was amazing.
That is
The
amazing.
only sad part for me is that I wasn't there to watch all of it. Other than that, it was great.
So the experience of having someone give you the space to make decisions
Yes.
and to make choices and to brainstorm and to figure out solutions, because you probably didn't have that before, and
Right.
probably had a story going on that she wasn't able to do that. Like, a lot of people that have been through things like that end up with a story like, I can't do anything right, everything I do fails, I always mess everything up, that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
suddenly she's in a place where someone is making space for her to like step up and make the decisions and do the work. And she
Hmm.
rose to the occasion. That's like amazing. It's
It is.
wonderful. And
Yeah.
it's what will happen if we do that,
Right.
right? Like we all can do that. We all can use our brain that way, use our
One of the
thoughts.
hardest things for parents who consider sending their kids to a school like this, because this is a big deal for a parent to send their kid to a school like this. This is non-structured. It doesn't have all the traditional structures, so it's daunting. It scares a lot of parents in terms of, well, what's going to happen with the kid when they get out of school? Are they going to be able to go to college? Blah blah
And
blah.
they probably wouldn't have a lot of support from their peers. Like I can imagine most parents making that choice have other adults in their life that are thinking
Mhm.
that they've lost their mind or something, right?
Absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So it takes a lot of courage for a parent, first of all, to send their kid to a school like this. And then, secondly, to basically live with the results day to day
Hmm.
because it's following the journey of the path, right? You follow your path, and the path is not a smooth path. There's bumps to it. You know, there's stuff that happens along the way. There's one story in particular that has always stuck with me. It doesn't come from the school we started. Our school was based on a model created in Massachusetts near Boston, in an area called the Sudbury Valley, and the Sudbury Valley School has a whole bunch of stories they put out. You can actually anybody can go look this up online. Sudval.org, I believe, is their website. You can just look at all kinds of materials that they put out. But one particular story that got published in one of the books that they published over the years really stuck with me. It was the story of a student who went to this school. Now, this school was really, really successful. Lots and lots of great successes coming out of it. But still, the parents had to deal with the kind of stuff we're talking about. And this one kid kind of pushed it to the limit for the parents, because every day he went to school, he did not do what other kids did. He didn't tend to be a big social person. He didn't tend to get involved in all the games and so forth the other kids were playing. They had a little pond on the property. He went there every day with his fishing pole and fished every day, every day for the entire school year.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then at the beginning of the next year, the parent would come to the head staff member and say, my kid was fishing all last year. He didn't do anything but go fishing. Is this really working? And the guy says, you got to trust the model. And then they'd go through another year and the same thing would happen. I mean,
Oh,
this is really pushing the parent to the limit. I don't know what the time frame was. I don't know how long this went on, but at one point, the kid, out of the blue, shocked all of the staff members by coming up to one of them one day and saying, "I want to learn how to use a computer." And the staff member said, "Okay," kind of like trying to find his or her ground. Like, okay, what do I do with this kid who's been fishing every day? Well, you do understand this. Now, this was not modern computers. This is like 20, 30 years ago. So this was
right,
like early in the
right.
development of computers. You understand that in order to use a computer, you have to have some math skills, right? And you have to know how you have to know English pretty well because you have to type everything. He says, "Oh, I know all that. Where did you learn that?" "Well, when I was fishing." To this day, they don't know where he learned all this stuff. He claims he learned it while he was fishing. And what happened after he left the school was that he got hired by Hewlett Packard and spent his
Wow.
career or part of his career at Hewlett Packard as a VP.
I want this guy to write a book so I can read it.
But can you imagine what that parent went through?
Yeah.
Every single year, day to day, knowing that their kid was just fishing, and it from the outside looking in, it looked like he was learning nothing.
Well, I know there are stories, there are different streams of homeschooling. One of them is unschooling.
Yes.
And there are also a lot of different thoughts about reading, learning to read and reading.
Mhm.
Now, I used a particular model that I've been racking my brain to try to remember the name of it because I can't, because it's been 30 years. But both of mine were reading when they were about 3.
Mhm.
But there are other schools of thought that they wouldn't teach reading at all. And these kids would be like 9 years old, 10 years old, and not reading.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then suddenly a year later, they'd just be reading Dickens, they'd just be
Right.
picking up like, whoa, what just happened? And it was like when they were ready. So all of the parents that are putting so much pressure on themselves right now to be teaching for hours and hours a day. There's been several things I've read that have been really wonderful and kind. One of them was from a teacher that basically said, um, dear parent who is trying to homeschool, like, catching your child up after this is over is my job.
Mm.
And what your child needs right now is to feel safe and loved and grounded and to have some playful times and to create memories of all of that. And that's your job. And I thought it was just really, really nice. Right. And
That's great. Yeah. I mean, that's a rare teacher to be willing to put the parents at ease like that.
yeah, I thought that was so important because I know, there's all these parents that they're also working from home and being expected to homeschool their kid
Right.
and get the work done. It's like, that's a lot. It's a lot. I homeschooled mine for 6 years and it was a full-time job.
Mhm.
And I didn't even have a seriously structured curriculum. At some point,
Mhm.
I decided to kind of go without a curriculum and let them learn, but we still spent a lot of time with all of that learning, right? I let them learn um, geometry by building a scale model of a castle in the living room
Oh,
that took
okay.
up the whole living room, right? And if you want to learn math, just learn how to cook.
That's true. That's very true.
Right. So there's all kind, it can all be, all of those subjects and topics can start to become integrated where you're learning all kinds of different things while you're
Mhm.
learning one. I mean, learn some carpentry, build a birdhouse. You're going to need some math there too, and architecture and geometry. And so, especially the younger ages, there's so much they're just going to learn naturally because that's what they do. Now, I don't know that I could learn how to read and write and use a computer by fishing every day, but sounds like someone has done it. So,
Someone did it, yeah.
right?
Well, there's also I don't remember what I'm trying to rack my brain to remember what this guy's name was. He was an Indian educator, and he did something pretty dramatic. He went to the slums of one of the poorest cities in India, and at on a street in one of the poor neighborhoods at sidewalk level, at the height that a small child could handle, he had installed in the wall, kind of like you would find a teller machine built into the wall. He had
Right?
a computer installed in the wall,
Oh, wow.
and the computer could be used by any kid. It had an internet connection, but there were like two little gotchas where it was concerned. The first was none of the kids in this particular area knew English, and the computer was written in English.
Oh,
And the second gotcha was there were no instructions on how to use it. So it was basically put there and then let's see what happens. He came back a year later and learned that all of the area kids had taught each other how to use the computer. They learned it together. They learned how to cooperatively. They taught themselves how to do it. They'd become really proficient at it, and they were basically begging to have more than to work with. They had taught themselves English in the process.
that's
I mean,
amazing.
they did the whole thing. They taught themselves the whole thing.
That's
And this is not
fantastic.
something that happened just once. He's replicated this experience in a number of different places around the world, and it's always producing the same result.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can
Well,
actually see it. There's a TED talk by this guy, and if I can remember his name, I'll tell you the name so you can go look it up. But he does a TED talk on what his experience was.
that's so cool. That
Yeah.
reminds me of certain games that I've played before that they don't give you any instruction. It's like, all right, and you just trial and error, and eventually, eventually people start to write tutorials and things, but in the beginning of them, you just figure it out. You just have to figure it out, and you will figure it out, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's good for our brain actually to do that.
It is. It is. I've been taking advantage of this whole stuck at home routine to really work my brain. I've been doing that actually before going back to November when I started this programming project.
Right.
I've been learning stuff that I thought I was never going to learn because I'd given up on it. I'd given up on myself. And I've been stretching my brain. Talk about plasticity,
Yeah,
neuroplasticity. Oh my goodness. My neuroplasticity has definitely improved in the last 6 to 8 months just because of that
that's
activity.
awesome. So okay, so now I want to kind of pick your brain about it. So you've noticed that.
Yep.
So how have you noticed that affecting like your conscious creation practice?
That's a good question. How have I noticed it in relation to conscious creation? I'm not sure I've drawn a connection that way, but if I were to look at that, I would say the biggest connection is that my confidence has improved
Oh yeah.
because I was doing something. I mean, when I started, first of all, I picked a platform that was probably not the best platform to start with. It was just not the right choice. I'm glad that I did in the long run, but what ended up happening was in the first 3 months, it was one day after another a failure, just continuous failure. And that really wears you down. I mean, it just beats you up. So sticking through all that and just staying with it and being kind to myself as I could, as kind as I could, throughout the whole process, taking entire days off at a time, just doing whatever it took to get myself into the best frame of mind. When you do that a lot, that builds confidence because over time you get better at it, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's what was happening with me. I was over time, I was getting better at it to the point where finally, I think it was in January, I actually had a breakthrough. Like, oh my God, I actually got something to work.
Yay.
And
I
it
remember
was
having this conversation with you
yeah,
like at the end of the summer. And it was like, well, why don't you just build it yourself? And you were like, oh yeah, no, I'm done
that's
with
where I
that.
was
I
coming from. That's
don't
exactly where I was coming
Yeah,
from.
yeah. And
Yeah,
so it's amazing, just sticking with it gives you confidence, right? And then you
it
start to
does.
see some results, and
Yeah.
then you feel confident about that. Um, I have been a knitter and a crocheter for a long time. And every once in a while, somebody will ask me about that. And I always give them the same advice. And that is that when I first learned how to knit, I did not learn correctly. Like I was not
Oh my.
holding the thread and needles in the correct way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I still had a beautiful product. Well,
Mm-hmm.
but the thing was, I was never able to build up any kind of like speed or anything because I wasn't holding them right. Then I set it down for a long, long time because I was, homeschooling kids and doing things. And then when I decided to pick it back up, I kind of had to relearn it. And I decided that I was going to relearn it the right way.
Mm.
I was going to hold the thread and the needles or the hook the right way. And it was so awkward at first because I was used to doing it the wrong way. and I had to retrain myself to do it, the correct way.
All
And
right.
it was terribly awkward. And it's kind of like if you're right-handed and you decide you're going to write with your left hand. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, the product is terrible. It feels awful.
Mm-hmm.
But I stuck with it until it started feeling natural.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not believe how much better, faster, easier everything was, because I stuck with learning it the correct way. And so I always think about that and kind of apply it to everything, because now I'm really confident in my skills, right? And I didn't have that level of confidence the first time around, even though I was producing beautiful things, but it was because it just wasn't doing it correctly, right?
Right.
And so I think about that, how we apply that to law of attraction. I was just talking to somebody this morning in a coaching session about not neuroplasticity, but neural connections.
Mm.
And they were having a certain thing happen. And I said, you realize that you're in this loop of just having a response to a certain thing, a response you don't like. That's why you're reaching out to me, because you don't like the way you feel. But if you keep doing the same thing, you keep having the same response, because our brain does that. Our brain makes a groove and it just automatically does that. The good news is you can undo that, but you have to be willing to go through the pain of like learning how to knit the right way, right?
Right.
Or
Yes.
learning how to build, your software platform
Right.
from a new thing where your brain is struggling, where you're failing, where you're like, oh, I hate this so much.
Yeah.
But then one day, suddenly is that wonderful, miraculous day when things go right and you realize you do have skills, you have learned something, and you do have the confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you leveled up. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
right?
like, well, it's also, I think it's more about, you mentioned earlier that I was so resistant to it. That's not the way you said it, but that's what it amounted to. I was really, really resistant to it. And it was true. I was resistant to it.
Right.
And that resistance carried through. It carried into when I first started the project. I was resistant for those first few months. And I'm sure that was leading to my lack of success. I ended up spending a large chunk of that time just kind of going to school online, just learning some stuff, relearning some stuff I'd previously learned,
Yeah.
but learning it more completely than I had before, and trying to build on that foundation. And even there, I found day to day that program that I had written for myself that said, oh God, this is so painful. I don't want to have to do this, made it painful so that I didn't want to have to do this. I had to learn how to refocus my attention on this isn't so bad. There's actually some good stuff I'm getting out of this, finding positives, finding silver linings before I could even learn anything.
But see, we're resistant for such good reasons.
Tell me what mine were, because I don't know what mine were.
Well, I was thinking about that this morning, in like a part of my life where I grew up in a home that had a great deal of conflict.
Mm.
And so I didn't want to have a home full of conflict, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And so I had terrible boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I said yes when I didn't want to say yes. I agreed to do things I didn't really feel like doing, but I just didn't want to have conflict. Well, but it was for such good reasons.
Mm.
I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to be mean, right? I didn't want to deny people the things that they expected of me. I wanted to be seen as caring and giving. I had great reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with any kind of resistance. Like your reasons for being resistant is, I don't feel like struggling.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that was
Right?
it. Yeah. Yeah, I would phrase it at that time as, I've already been there. I've done that. I don't want to do that anymore.
Right.
I got the t-shirt. Get out of here.
Yeah, no, I know what this is like and I'm not going back. I'm going to do this again. Yeah. So it's always a good reason. There's an idea that we could always assume positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a great idea for relationships.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that everyone's intention is always positive, because unfortunately that's not true. But if we can assume positive intent, then we're starting off on a better foot, because most of the time it will turn out to be true. And there's less resistance that way if we just assume that. So it's like with you saying, it's like you had this story you were already telling because of past experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that for all of us.
I think so.
Yeah.
In fact, as you're talking about that, I'm remembering that you've pointed out in the past, we have relationships, not just to people, we have relationships to everything. And in my case, this was a bad relationship between me and software.
Yes.
And I was basically learning to rework that relationship that I had with software. Not that I had a long history of bad relationships with software. Actually, my history had been pretty good over the years, but I'd gotten to the point where I was kind of done with it. Like I just didn't want to learn anymore. I was tired of it, you
Yeah.
know? And through that tiredness, I developed my resistance. I basically built up this whole storyline that said, I don't have to deal with that anymore. Go away, get out of my life. Meanwhile, there was another piece of me, part of my inner being, I think, saying, hey, come on, you're going to like this. This is going to be good. And I was saying, no, I won't. I don't like this at all.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the key words you just said was tired,
Mm,
right? And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but that acronym HALT, HALT,
mm.
hungry, angry, lonely, tired, like we shouldn't make decisions when we're any of those things.
I was 3 out
And
of 4, I think.
and then every once in a while you were hungry too. So
Yeah,
it was
that too. Yeah.
so I think that that's important to remember, is that with everything, with conscious creation, with what we're involved in right now,
Mm,
with this terribly strange pandemic where we're all inside, is that everything has an ebb and a flow, and this too shall pass. Nothing is like forever. um, when we make decisions, sometimes we make them all based on past experience, because it feels like every decision we make sometimes is like so weighty and it's just going to be forever. But the truth is, somebody said to me one time, I thought it was kind of brilliant. They said, if you manifest something that you don't want, just give it back.
it's true.
And
That's a great point.
I was like, okay. Because I
Yeah.
would go into, I'm very analytical. And if I'm going into making a decision about what I want to manifest next, sometimes, oh my gosh, I can really just drive myself up a wall
Oh, me
by
too.
just not being clear on it yet, and then just going around and around and around, because what if this and what if that and hearing someone say that to me, it's like, well, if you manifest something you don't want, just give it back. You don't have to keep it. I was like,
Mm,
oh my gosh, aha moment. And so
mhm.
now I remind myself of that all the time. It's like, you know what, give it a shot. If you absolutely hate it, then make another choice.
That's brilliant. I love the analysis to eliminate analysis. I mean, that's what that is. That's getting rid of analysis through a
Yeah,
very simple
it's
analysis
called,
that says, I don't have to keep this thing.
right. There's a phrase, it's called paralysis by analysis.
Paralysis by analysis. Boy, am I a champion at that.
Oh my goodness. Me too. Gold medalist. Man, I'm good at it. But it hasn't been as much of a problem ever since I had that idea.
Yeah, I'm going to keep
That
that one in mind. That's good.
just change it if you don't like it. Everything is
Yeah,
always changing anyway.
this is true.
Right.
We mentioned Joel earlier. Joel used to tell me exactly that. He used to tell me, particularly after we had done a show and I was struggling with something, he'd say, you're doing the paralysis analysis thing, drop it. This is not the way to go. Just pick something and just do it. Don't plan it. Don't figure it out. Don't do it. Just dive right in and do it. And I'd say, oh, I don't know. I can't do that.
Right. Yeah,
But I
that's
did
hard
get
for
to the
some
point
people.
where I could try to do that, and it wasn't so bad. I
Yeah.
was actually a little surprised the first time I tried it. Like, okay. I mean, it was the hard part was just going through it for the first time. But none of my fears that I had associated with it actually came to pass at all. It was just weird. It was just different. That's all.
In the Christian Bible and the Jewish Bible, because it's in the Torah, there's a story of Job, the book of
Hmm.
Job in the Bible,
Yep.
where every bad thing that could possibly happen happened to this guy.
Yes.
And in the story, Job says, the thing I feared the most has come to pass. And as much as we talk about, if you keep worrying about something, you're going to be more likely to have that thing. I still hold to the idea that, what, the thing we fear the most hardly ever comes to pass.
Mm. Pretty rare, actually.
Right? So I think that's a really rare story.
Mm-hmm.
The
No
thing I
doubt
feared
about
the
it.
most has come to pass. Not that we should fear things, but I don't know. That's another topic for another day, but
We'll bring that one up. I actually wanted to acknowledge a couple of people in the live stream
yes.
who've been sharing some stuff. And I wanted to say, first of all, to Ignacio, I'm sorry. I was trying, he or she came onto the Zoom platform, and I tried to send a message, a text message, a chat message, and realized that with the new setup we've got, because we got hit with hackers a few weeks ago. So I had to
I
set up
heard,
this new
yeah.
setup. And everything goes into a waiting room. Apparently, if I send a message to a waiting room, the person in the waiting room can't send a message back. I didn't know that.
Oh,
So this person was probably trying to reach me, and then they went back onto the Zoom platform, or I'm sorry, the YouTube platform, and said, "I have this interesting story to tell." Well, I didn't see that till it was too late, so I apologize for that. But probably the best thing to do is just tell us what you can about the story in the chat. We'll share it that way, and we can talk about it that way. And
please
then
do.
and Josephine also added something. She said, "I'm writing a short story about a couple in quarantine with their kids," which fits in exactly with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So when you get somewhere with that story, even if it's not finished, Josephine, share the story, because especially on a Wednesday when Cindy's here, because I mean it's right in line with what we're talking about.
Right? Yeah. Are you writing it based on personal experience, Josephine?
It's a good question. I'll have to see if she answers that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's the best way to write anyway. You know that. We both know that.
Yeah.
Writing from experience is always the strongest way to write.
One of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Gilbert, who was so famous for writing Eat, Pray, Love, which was somewhat of a memoir.
Mm-hmm.
But then she wrote a fiction book. I mean, she's written more than one fiction book, but a really great fiction book that I loved. And I heard one time in an interview where she said something like, if you really want to know about a person, just read their fiction, not their
True.
memoir.
That's true.
Right. She said, my fiction's probably a lot more autobiographical than than my other writing. I thought that was kind of funny. So we'll be interested to see what you come up with, Josephine. It's a great thing to be writing about right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hope there are a lot. I keep telling myself I should be writing more. I've been writing a lot, but writing in the context of what's going on right now, because small details that kind of seem boring to us now, when you look back on them in history, they aren't boring.
Mm.
Right? My son is a chef, and he shared something about in the 1919 flu pandemic, that there were armed guards that were set up on the water to keep people from raiding the oyster beds.
Oh, okay.
Because oysters were thought to ward off the flu.
Ah.
But the reason was because the oyster brine is loaded with zinc, and zinc actually does help the body fight off viruses or bacteria or whatever. So I thought that might have seemed so boring at the time, but now looking back, it's so interesting. And so I hope that, a lot of us that are writers are writing things down and keeping track of the way things are right now.
I think that is probably true. I would not be at all surprised if we start seeing novels and nonfiction books coming out of this experience where this becomes regularly referenced in the material.
Right.
I expect that we're going to see movies that reference this in the material. And
Oof.
I think it's going to be the pandemic that never ends in that sense.
Yes, I keep thinking about all the political movies that we're going to have to deal with for the next 20 years. But here's the thing to think about, though, is that I say this a lot, and I hold to it, and that is that we create our experiences by the stories we tell.
Yes.
And so what kind of stories do we want to be telling? What do we want to see this turn into? Because as conscious creators, our words have power. And the more we tell the truth, and the more we keep our word, the more power our words have. Right? And so what are we talking about, and what do we want to see, and what do we want to experience while this is all happening? How do we want to, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are now quarantined, a lot of probably mostly women that are now quarantined with their abusive partners, right? And that's been a big deal. It's been in the news. It's been in, there have been hotlines for people,
right.
Strategies to help people in that position. But looking at it from an opportunity standpoint, it's like, what kind of power do we want to step into? And what do we want our predominant energy to be while we're in this situation? Because all of that is going to create the future, right?
It does, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
you're naming a particularly challenging type of situation, but literally everybody is going through a situation one way or another where they're faced with this exact same question. If they're in an LOA circle, if they're aware of the fact that by changing their story, they're going to get a different experience. So it's kind of like what we were talking about a few minutes ago about like when I was last fall considering this programming project, and you were suggesting it, and I was saying no, 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 no.
yeah,
You know, I had to decide that it was worthwhile for me to even attempt to change my story before I could begin to change the story. You have to make the decision. You have
yeah,
to decide, okay, I don't know how this is going to work out. I could go crazy with the analytics, I could paralyze myself with analysis, but I still won't know how it's going to play out. The
yeah,
only way I'm going to find out is to actually try changing the story. And that's scary. That's tough. That's like going against all this program that I've been building up for all this time. That's what people now are facing in droves. I am now a conscious creator in a pandemic, in quarantine. And if I want to change my experience, I got to change my story. That's a big deal.
right. So here's a tip, and that is, if you know what your core values are, and this is not a difficult thing to figure out. It sounds like it. And if you ever do a Google search for like lists of core values, there are lists out there with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. And if I, as your coach today, ask you to just tell me the top 3 or 5, that's really difficult. And a lot
Yeah.
of times people start looking at these lists and then they see values that they think they should have, like, well, I am
Oh.
married with kids, so shouldn't family be one of my top core
Mm-hmm.
values? Right? It's like, oh, I should. But that's not what we're talking about. We can look at the things that bring you great joy and look at the things that make you very uncomfortable and figure out why. So
Mm-hmm.
my top core values: freedom, beauty, creativity, those are some of my magic, those are some of my top
Yes.
core values, right? And how do I know? Well, because when I don't have those things, like I could never go to an office every day in a cube, in a white cube that couldn't be
Mm-hmm.
decorated, and where I would go bonkers. Why? Because I have a really high value around beauty. So I want, my office is full of beautiful things, violets and, pretty things, right? Because that's how I want to experience life.
Right.
So someone who has a value around like being outdoors may really be struggling in a place if they can't get outdoors. So if you know what your core values are, then you can write your story around that. You can say, in 6 months or a year or whenever this thing is over, and I look back at my experience, what would have had to happen for all of my core values to have been being honored?
Mm.
So like, I am a painter, so I don't have a studio right now, but I set up like a painting studio in my house so that in this time of quarantine I can spend some time painting. I've been writing, I've been, right? So when I look back and tell my story of what it was like in quarantine, hopefully those values will be honored. So just something to think about if you're
That's good.
wanting to write a story to create some new thing in your life moving forward, coming out of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all feel better when we've honored our values.
That's true. That's very true. Something else that I know is good to do, but again, can be challenging when we're changing the story. Because that's really what we're talking about. We're changing the story from the
Right.
one that we've been experiencing that we don't like all that much. Because it's not all that much fun to be forced to do something that we're not really enjoying doing.
Right.
But changing the story to what we do like, to what we do enjoy, we do value. First of all, like you said, you have to identify what it is, and then you have to actually dream about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean that in itself, if you're not used to dreaming about this thing that you actually enjoy, it can be a struggle the first few times. Trying, well, okay, so what would I do if I could do this thing that I love so much? And you draw a blank, and then you have to kind of sit there with it and just kind of ask yourself the question a couple times before something finally comes through.
I've been excited to hear from clients and also just people online that are talking about their experience. How many people in my realm anyway, who have started taking classes online
Oh yeah.
to learn something new. I had one that started taking like the next level of their degree, just said, I'm going to go ahead and finish this. I'm going to do it online. And other people who have just started learning something that they've always wanted to learn, like how to be a writer or how to be an artist or how to speak another language or whatever. And I think it's so exciting because, you know, that's awesome that people are taking those steps to enrich themselves, to grow themselves personally in a time when, you know, it would be really just as easy to just decide to, I don't know, just start day drinking all the time or something, right? It's just like, oh, whatever, I'm just gonna watch as many movies as I can, which I've been watching movies, I have, but I've also been taking time to, you know,
But we have more subscriptions for movies now than we've had ever in our lives.
oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, right? People were, I asked in my online group, I asked like, what is everybody watching? And I kid you not, probably 80% of the things people listed, I'd never heard of.
yes, right.
Right? Like, you know, somebody says the name of a movie or a TV show and you've heard of it all the time, but you've just never seen it. It wasn't that. It was like, I really think 75 to 80%, I was like, some of the channels, I'd never even heard of the channel.
Right?
I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, we definitely have content. So it's nice to see that besides just being entertained, that people are also enriching themselves with learning something new or contributing something, right? Creating something, being creative, making art, writing, making music. All these online choirs are popping up and like,
yeah.
right? Like people that are playing music over Zoom together.
Right.
It's amazing.
I'm impressed by that because Zoom can sometimes have a lag. So that the fact they can
Right?
do that at all is really pretty good.
Can you imagine? It's like, yeah, that one player seems like he's off. Yeah.
But absolutely, yes. As you were describing all that, I was kind of imagining somebody who is considering taking a course. Because you pointed out a lot of people are just kind of taking course just because it's something they always wanted to do. And I
Right.
could see how that could be a place where you could kind of trip yourself up. You could say, well, I really should be going after a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then you allow that to get in the way of not doing the thing because, well, you're not taking it for credit or something like that.
Yeah,
Instead of
don't do
giving
that.
yourself
Just get
permission.
curious and
That's
follow
it.
your curiosity.
Yeah. Just give yourself permission to just do it anyway, and screw the degree. Don't worry about that. You can do the degree later if you really want
I
to
was
do
just
it.
gonna say, you know, if you really decide to, you just do that later. Yeah,
Yeah, it's not a
yeah,
big deal.
yeah.
That's an
And
example of how we can trip ourselves up just by, and I that's just one particular way. There's lots of them where we just come up with arguments against the thing that we really want to try.
it's the shoulds.
Yeah, the shoulds, right?
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, gotta let go of the shoulds and just go for it anyway. That
Yeah.
that was the greatest experience. The first time I just refused to do any analyzing and just try to do it without any plan. Scared the daylights out of me. It really did. I was just like, I don't know how to do this. What do I do? Well, I'll just start doing something. So I was doing it at the computer. I don't know what I'm going to do here. And I just started working a mouse and typing with no plan. And it was tough. But by sticking to it, I found that stuff started to open up, like things started to come to my awareness that weren't there before. And it was like the pieces were filling in for me. Now, I know this is the back of my mind that was actually at work, but because I didn't stop to try to analyze the whole thing, it was almost like I was experiencing as I was analyzing. I was, oh yeah, that would make sense. Well, this doesn't make sense, so I'll put that aside. Yes, but this would make a sense, so I'll include that. And one thing at a time, just kind of piecing it together and not having any idea what the jigsaw puzzle is going to look like.
But the cool thing is that it started just coming to you
It just started coming.
because you gave it the space to come to you.
Right.
Right? It's like you made the space by saying, okay, I'm going to just open up the potential here. And then it started showing up. This has nothing to do with that, except for that it's connected to the idea that everything we want's already here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've heard that idea before in
Sure.
LOA circles. I've heard it in magic circles. It's like everything you want is actually already here. So I'm going to tell this cool story just because I've been sharing it with everybody.
Okay.
I don't know if you know what a hagstone is.
I do not.
A hagstone is a rock with a natural hole in it.
Oh, okay.
Some of them literally look like a little donut.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of them it's any kind of rock of any size or shape that has a natural hole in it. And they use them a lot in folk magic. And it said that you can look through the hole and see magical beings or fairies, or, you can use them like a crystal ball or like a scrying mirror, right? By looking through the hole. Well, I've always wanted one. And the beaches that we're close to are that very smooth, they call it sugar sand. It's white sand, very small, not a lot of rocks anywhere. The beaches on the California coast where I grew up had a lot of rocks and rocky beaches, right? But every time we go anywhere where there's rocks, and we don't live in a part of the country where there's rocks, like, where you live, you may have some yards where people have a giant rock in their front yard, right? It's like rocks everywhere.
That's
it's not like that down here in the South. There aren't a lot of rocks anywhere unless you get like a load of gravel delivered somewhere. It's just no rocks. And there's usually no rocks in my yard. Well, I've wanted a hagstone for a long time. And every time we go somewhere where it's rocky, I look and I've just never found one. So Sunday night, right before dinner, my husband's been working out in our little yard. He's been working out there, building gardens and making things. Like the whole time we've been in quarantine, he walks in and he hands me something. And I don't know if I will be able to show it to you in the camera where you can see it.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a rock with a hole in it.
With a hole in it.
And from different angles, it looks like a face or a dragon.
Yeah, sure.
It's like a face. And I said, this is just more proof that everything we want is already here. So if you're stuck at home, like we all are, and you're thinking that the things you want are somewhere out there where you can't go.
Well, especially in the age of the internet. I mean, there are just so many ways information can come to us at home via the internet. So a lot of our excuses are pretty much gone in that sense. It's not like, we're destitute. It's not like we were in quarantine in, say, the 1960s. That would have been an entirely different experience. Basically, you're stuck with 3 channels of soap operas during the day. That would have been it.
And the public broadcasting channel.
And PBS,
right? Sesame Street was on that channel when I was growing up.
That's true.
That made it a little bit better.
Yeah, so there would have been something, but it not the all day streaming of every single series imaginable. That was just not a possibility.
Yeah. So
and access to the internet was non-existent, so none of that was available. Smartphones not available. Computers not available.
Right.
It was
like we can see each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Then it would have just been a telephone call, which would have cost a lot of money.
That's right. About 3 minutes at $3 or something like that.
Okay, I gotta go. This is getting expensive.
Right.
Yeah. I always think of these people used to say that they can't say anymore, right? Like they can't say that, or they can't say, "Oh, sorry, my clock is slow." Like, no.
Yeah, you say that to a kid these days, they don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't make any sense.
Or like, why do you say dial the phone?
Dial the phone, right?
Right. So we do have so many advantages that we would not have had then. But just be encouraged that you can have whatever you want. And that the feelings that we all think we need something outside of ourselves to get to, we can get to them even in quarantine.
It's true. The only thing that limits us is our own imaginations.
Yes.
And our own imaginations limit us because we limit them.
There's a Buddhist saying that says the mind that sees limitation is the limitation.
Yes, that's true. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So, hey, speaking of limitations, I want to make sure that I don't limit anybody who wants to become a subscriber to the podcast. How's that for a segue?
That was good.
And it's true that most of our listeners are subscribers, and we love that fact so much. In fact, we actually are reaching a new record this month in terms of number of unique listeners because, believe it or not, sometimes people actually play episodes over. It took me a while to figure out what was going on, but we have listeners who will repeat play episodes.
A favorite song, just play it again.
Yeah. So which was great. It kept inflating the numbers. I couldn't quite understand what it was, but we have this month for the first time hit 500 right now we're at 556 unique listeners, not counting how many times they played episodes, and that's a new high for us.
Wonderful.
So yeah, that's pretty exciting. And we want to add more to that. So if you are not yet subscribed, just go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net. And at the top of the page, you'll see instructions on how to do it and get that subscription. It takes about 1 or 2 clicks. And then also check us out on YouTube because we live stream to YouTube. You can watch us while we're doing this. You can see Cindie holding up her rock with the hole in it.
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking people that are listening are like, what is going on?
But people on YouTube could see it. So that's
Yes.
the reason. There it is. Yeah, she's holding it up. So check us out there and subscribe there as well. And keep following us because we call it your daily dose of happy for a reason. We want to help build up your ability to stay in the high vibration space and keep our own up at the same time. This is a help everybody at the same time kind of a thing. It's the thing. It's the reason why I do this 5 days a week, and I love it. So thanks for those of you who are subscribers, and thank you to those of you who are new subscribers who are joining today. We appreciate you.
Yes, we do.
And we appreciate you too, Cindie.
I appreciate you. I'm happy to be here.
As usual, you told some wonderful stories, so thank you very much for that. And looking forward to do this again next week. Thank you, live streamers, and thank you especially to our podcast listeners as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Hi, everyone.